It's not the government's job to pick winners and losers in the marketplace. That choice belongs to consumers. And when you let consumers decide and you let people pursue their passions as entrepreneurs, all sorts of wonderful innovation happens. Additionally, you create jobs. So here in North Carolina, just to use one example, about 43,000 jobs are lost every year because of licensing laws. So you don't need corporate welfare or handouts. You could create thousands of jobs here in the Tar Heel State just by reforming occupational licensing. We've ranked all the states, and North Carolina, I'm sad to say, was 17th worst. So not the very worst, but more hostile to small business owners than most states, and that's unfortunate. We attack it on multiple fronts. Obviously, first and foremost, we are a litigation firm. And so one of the things I do is I go around the nation filing pro bono lawsuits where we don't sue for money, and I don't charge my clients anything. Instead, I represent small business owners in cases where I ask judges to throw out unconstitutional laws. Additionally, we do quite a bit of legislative work and activism, in the hope that sometimes comes true that the government will do the right thing with us without us needing to sue them. We had a case in Charlotte just a couple years ago representing someone who had to get a license to teach makeup. Right? To teach makeup. She had to get a license. Just this wonderful, hardworking, aspiring entrepreneur. And so we filed a First Amendment lawsuit because the thing being regulated was our client's speech. And thankfully, the state of North Carolina decided not to fight back, and we reached a resolution. And so she has her business today. We also have a case, which isn't an occupational licensing case, but we have a challenge to North Carolina's CON law, Certificate of Need. I've had a food truck case in Carolina Beach. And so we've been pretty active in North Carolina. To be fair, we're active in most states, but there definitely is work to be done here. She was actually contacted by the state of North Carolina. They did an undercover sting, likely in response to some sort of online, some sort of complaint from someone who noticed online, a competitor, that there was going to be an unlicensed competitor. And so the state of North Carolina contacted her and informed her that if she were to actually teach someone how to put makeup on, she would be committing a crime. So the state of North Carolina not only regulates the license to be a makeup artist or to be an esthetician or a cosmetologist, but there are also a separate set of licenses for anyone who wants to teach. And so you could practice this skill for decades, be an expert in it, but then you have to jump through all of these additional hoops. These include structural requirements for your school that in my client's case had nothing to do with what she wanted to teach. She is a very creative person. She does makeup for people who appear on TV, really artistic, creative makeup, and she wanted to teach that type of makeup to people who were interested. North Carolina's requirements for makeup schools had nothing to do with what she wanted to teach. Anytime you have a one-size-fits-all approach, you're going to run into those problems. And so we see it over and over again, both with cosmetology licenses and with all different types of licenses, where they ensnare, sadly, often intentionally, people who aren't really trying to do what the license is all about, but the people in charge of creating those licenses are just trying to prevent competition. We see kind of a similar dynamic with food truck laws, where cities are increasingly realizing how popular food trucks are, but they still don't want competition. Carolina Beach passed a law that said anyone could have a food truck as long as you were also a restaurant owner in Carolina Beach. And so Carolina Beach had no problem with food trucks. They just didn't want so-called outsiders, and this is the word they used, outsiders, coming across the bridge and competing with their local restaurant owners. That's not just wrong, that's unconstitutional under the North Carolina Constitution. And so we were proud to bring a lawsuit on behalf of some food truck owners. Only a week later, the city threw in the towel, and now food trucks are allowed in Carolina Beach, even if you don't own a restaurant there. Maybe someday we'll bring enough of these lawsuits that local governments and state governments will start caring about their state constitution and the federal constitution. I do think there is an increased awareness, but I still think most state legislators and most local politicians don't give much thought to constitutional law when they pass these laws, sadly. We don't have unlimited resources, right? We can't file a lawsuit for everything the government does wrong. That's a long list. And so anytime the government does something right or fixes a problem on its own, that frees up our resources to attack a different problem. And so we love it when the government does the right thing. That's why we're happy to work with legislators, some of whom will reach out to us for guidance, and we're happy to provide it. But when they don't, then sadly we have to file lawsuits. When you look at the different states, many of whom will have some licenses but not others, and then those licenses won't exist in other states. And so when you compare a state that has a license with a state that doesn't have a license, for almost all of these licenses, there is no positive impact on quality, health, or safety created by these licenses. And so that fear is really unfounded. However, to the extent that a legislator needs to do something, and oftentimes legislators, they feel like they just have to do something. Well, it turns out that there is an entire spectrum of options that they have available. This could be required registration, required bonding, required insurance. There are all sorts of things that can be done short of banning lawful employment. Banning someone from having a job should always be the last resort. And that's how it used to be. You know, in the 1950s, only 1 in 20 Americans were required to have a government permission slip to work. Now it's up to over 1 in 4. That's not the way things are supposed to work in a free country. And so this ban on work that was only supposed to be a last resort has now become oftentimes the first resort of legislators, and that's usually because entrenched interests ask for it. Right? Anytime a business goes to the government and asks to be regulated, that should be a huge red flag. But instead, what's happening is that politicians are caving to the demands of powerful interests and banning competition, and that just hurts everyone. It's always risky to overgeneralize. There's a whole mix of people who work in government. Some of them are trying to do the right thing and are just misguided. Some of them know they're doing the wrong thing, but you're right, they think that they'll get away with it. But at the end of the day, government is clearly out of control. I mean, that's why we win so many of our cases. We're getting ready to have our 9th U.S. Supreme Court argument. In our previous 8, we won 7. Overall, we win over 70% of our cases. And it's because government is so out of control that even under the most deferential standards of review, like the rational basis test, we tend to win because government has just gotten carried away. And so that's when we come in. Any legislator or any staffer is always welcome to just reach out to us directly, and some of them do. But if they're looking for a repository of information, our website, ij.org, is fantastic. And there are best practices documents on there, model legislation, all sorts of surveys and different reports that will guide any legislator or any staffer who's really trying to do the right thing. We do see an increasing awareness. That being said, there's a difference between awareness and reform, right? And so one of the things that's frustrating is there's now a bipartisan consensus that reform is needed. I don't know how many things that the Trump administration and the Obama administration agree on. This is one of them. And you would think that that would lead to reform, right? When you have people on both sides of the aisle clamoring for reform, but then you go to state capitals and it's very difficult because the current entrenched interests are able, unfortunately, to usually fight back against that reform, even though that reform would benefit society as a whole. I'm optimistic that things will continue to improve. IJ has a tremendous track record of success in a number of areas, and even in occupational licensing, we have already seen improvement. Now, whether we'll get to the place where I would like things to be, we'll probably never get all the way there, but I'm proud to just keep chipping away at these regulations, because every time we get rid of one of these regulations, thousands of jobs are created. And that's a wonderful thing. And not just any jobs. They tend to be jobs that disproportionately go to disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, first-generation Americans, second-generation Americans, all the people who government claims to want to help, like small business owners. When you get rid of one of these regulations, those are the people that are being helped. And so every time we get rid of one, whether it's in court or through legislation, that's a wonderful thing. But that being said, the typical state has between 300 and 500 discrete occupational licenses. So, we might get rid of a couple here or a couple there. It tends to be a drop in the bucket. And so, you savor the individual victories, but we're well aware of how high the mountain is. As a matter of principle, the government should get rid of many of these occupational licenses, right? The government should not be arbitrarily preventing people from pursuing the occupation of their choice. But even if the government doesn't care about principle, they should care about jobs. And all you have to do to create thousands of jobs in North Carolina relatively easily is just reform occupational licensing laws. It's a shame it hasn't happened yet.